What do you do when you meet a monster that has ruled the battlefield for 3 years? A machine so feared that entire Allied tank companies refused to engage directly. The German Tiger tank was not just a weapon. It was psychological warfare on treads. Its 80mm gun could penetrate any Allied armor at ranges where return fire was suicide. But in the frozen towns of Germany in early 1945, something new rolled off the transport ships. Something the Wehrmacht had not planned for. The M26 Pershing heavy tank arrived not with fanfare, but with a quiet promise. The age of Tiger supremacy was about to end. This is the history of the day German tank crews stopped laughing. The day American steel finally hit back with equal force, and a moment one engagement near Cologne Cathedral changed the narrative of armored warfare forever. This is about the men who climbed into those Pershings knowing they might not come home, but also knowing they carried something their brothers in Shermans never had, a fighting chance. February 1945. The Third Reich is collapsing, but it is collapsing violently like a wounded animal backed into a corner. The Allies have crossed the Rhine in some places, but German resistance remains fanatical. Their tank crews, though outnumbered and running low on fuel, still possess the most feared armor in the European theater. The Tiger Bjorn, with its nearly impenetrable frontal armor and devastating 88mm KWK-36 gun, has achieved an almost mythical status. Allied tankers call encounters with Tigers meetings with death. Standard doctrine when spotting a Tiger is simple. Call an artillery. Call an air support. Do not engage directly unless you have 5:1 numerical superiority, and even then expect casualties. The American answer to German heavy armor has been until now not technological superiority, but numerical overwhelming. The M4 Sherman, reliable and mass-produced, fights Tigers the way wolves fight bears in packs, accepting losses, flanking when possible. American tank crews know their 75mm guns are useless against Tiger frontal armor beyond 300 yards. They know the Tiger can't kill them from twice that range. They climb into their Shermans anyway, because that is what duty demands. But something shifts in February 1945. The first 20 M26 Pershing heavy tanks arrive in Europe, assigned to the 3rd and 9th Armored Divisions. These machines represent 3 years of American engineering debate, bureaucratic resistance, and urgent battlefield necessity finally converging. The Pershing mounts a 9mm gun, carries frontal armor up to 4-inch hick, and weighs 46 tons, finally approaching the Tiger's weight class. But here is what matters. On March 6th, 1945, in the shattered streets of Cologne, Pershing No. 26, under the command of Sergeant Nicholas Maschlanis, encounters a German Panther tank at point-blank range. The engagement lasts seconds. The Pershing fires. The Panther explodes. A combat cameraman captures the entire sequence on film, and that footage becomes one of the most viewed pieces of tank combat documentation in history. For the first time, American tank crews watch footage of one of their own machines meeting German heavy armor on equal terms and winning decisively. The psychological impact ripples through armored units faster than any training manual could. The Pershing story begins not with glory, but with bureaucratic resistance and strategic miscalculation. That in 1942, American military doctrine holds that tank destroyers, not heavy tanks, should counter enemy armor. Tanks are supposed to exploit breakthroughs and support infantry. The tank destroyer force receives priority funding. Meanwhile, Army Ground Forces Commander General Leslie McNair believes heavy tanks are unwieldy and unnecessary. He points to the Sherman's reliability and producibility. He believes the war will be won by combined arms coordination, not armor duels. He is both right and catastrophically wrong. Combat reports from North Africa in 1943 tell a different story. American tankers report feeling outgunned and outmatched when facing German Tigers and Panthers. Lieutenant Colonel Croton Abrams, who will later become Army Chief of Staff, describes the psychological effect. When you know the enemy tank can kill you from 1,000 yards and you cannot hurt him until 300, you do not think about tactics. You think about survival. Field commanders begin demanding better tanks. The Ordnance Department responds with the T-26 heavy tank project. which will eventually become the Pershing. But development crawls. Weight requirements keep changing. The 90mm gun requires a larger turret, which requires a stronger suspension, which adds weight, which requires a more powerful engine. Each solution creates new problems. Meanwhile, production priority remains with the Sherman, which can be built in enormous numbers. General Dwight Eisenhower, reviewing the specifications in late 1943, makes a fateful decision. The D.O. not disrupt Sherman production. The T-26 project continues, but slowly as a backup option, not a priority. Then comes the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. German Tigers and Panthers savage American armored columns in the Ardennes. The disparity in tank capability becomes impossible to ignore. Entire Sherman platoons are destroyed by single Tiger tanks operating from concealed positions. After-action reports describe American tank crews abandoning their vehicles before engaging because they know engagement equals death. The psychological damage is as severe as the tactical losses. General Courtney Hodges, commanding 1st Army, sends urgent cables requesting immediate deployment of the T-26, now redesignated M26 Pershing. The bureaucratic dam breaks. Production accelerates. By February 1945, the first Pershings reach frontline units. The men assigned to crew these new machines face their own contradictions. They want better armor and firepower, but they also know the Pershing isn't proven. It is heavier than the Sherman, less maneuverable, more mechanically complex. Its Continental R975 engine is underpowered for the tank's weight, making it slower and prone to mechanical strain. The crews must learn new fire control systems, different ammunition handling procedures, and operating characteristics unlike anything they have trained on. They must do this while under fire during active combat operations with minimal technical support, and they must trust that this new machine will protect them better than the Shermans they are leaving behind. At its core, the Pershing deployment represents a fundamental shift in American military philosophy. The admission that technological power matters, that sometimes you cannot substitute numbers and determination for capability. The Sherman's nickname among German tankers is revealing Tommy Cooker, or Ronson after the lighter, because it lights up first time every time. Sherman. Crews know their tanks can brew up, catch fire, and cook the crew when penetrated because ammunition is stored in the hull with inadequate protection. The Pershing addresses this with wet ammunition storage surrounding shells, with water-filled jackets to prevent fires. This simple engineering choice saves lives, but the Pershing significance transcends engineering specifications. It represents a psychological recalibration. For 3 years, American tankers have fought with a fundamental understanding. We are outgunned, so we must outthink, outflank, and outnumber. This creates both courage and trauma. Courage because men climb into Shermans knowing the odds. Trauma because those odds include watching friends burn when their tank is hit. The Pershing changes the equation. Not completely. It is not invincible, but enough that American crews begin engagements thinking about victory rather than survival. Consider the 90mm gun's capabilities against a Tiger. Wang's frontal armor at 500 yards. The Pershing can penetrate. The reverse is also true. The Tiger can penetrate the Pershing, but now the engagement is mutual. This parity transforms tactics. Sherman crews are trained to avoid frontal engagements with heavy German armor. Pershing crews are trained to seek them. The tank's gun mantlet carries 4.5 inch of armor. The glacé plate angles at 46 degrees, increasing effective thickness. The turret rotates electrically with a backup manual system. These are not just technical features. They are psychological anchors that tell the crew, you can fight this battle. The tension between American mass production philosophy and German quality-focused engineering finds its resolution in the Pershing. The Germans build technological marvels. Tigers with nearly impenetrable armor. Panthers with superior optics. King tigers that dominate any battlefield they reach. But these machines are complex, expensive, and produced in limited numbers. By 1945, Germany fields perhaps 200 operational heavy tanks. America, by contrast, begins Pershing production, thinking not in hundreds, but in thousands. The plan calls for building a tank good enough to fight German armor, while simple enough to maintain in field conditions and numerous enough to affect battlefield outcomes. This is a distinctly American approach to warfare. Practical superiority through scalable competence. The Cologne engagement on March 6 becomes legendary precisely because it is documented combat. Cameraman Jim Bates is filming 3rd Armored Division operations when Pershing 26, nicknamed Fireball, rounds a corner and encounters a Panther tank at approximately 75 yards range. Neither crew expects the other. The Panther crew spots the Pershing first and traverses their gun, but Sergeant Mashlin's gunner, Corporal Clarence Smoyer, is faster. The Pershing's first 90mm round strikes the Panther's turret. The second round, fired 4 seconds later, penetrates the hull. The Panther explodes, its ammunition cooking off. The entire engagement lasts less than 10 seconds. What makes this moment transcendent is not just the tactical victory, but what it represents. An American medium 2 heavy tank meeting a German heavy tank in an urban knife fight and winning decisively through superior crew, training, and adequate equipment. The footage spreads through American armored units. Men who have spent months terrified of German heavy armor watch one of their new tanks kill a Panther at point-blank range. The psychological effect is transformative, but the Pershing's combat record in World War II is necessarily limited by its late arrival. Only 20 Pershings see combat in Europe before the German surrender. They participate in engagements around Cologne, the Ruhr Pocket, and the final drives into central Germany. Their documented kills include Panthers, Panzerface, and at least 1 Tiger Bis. More importantly, they change how German crews engage American armor. German tankers, accustomed to American Shermans, retreating when spotted, find Pershings advancing instead. The psychological dynamic inverts. The tank's real test comes not in Europe, but in Korea 5 years later, when North Korean T-34-85 tanks roll south. In June 1950, American forces initially deploy M24 Chaffee Light tanks whose 75mm guns are ineffective against T-34 armor. Pershing redecided M26 deploy urgently. At Jinju in July 1950, Pershings of the 8th Cavalry Regiment engaged T-34s at ranges between 300 and 800 yards. The 90mm gun proves decisively superior. T-34s that have dominated UN forces for weeks begin withdrawing when Pershings appear. The psychological advantage shifts, but Korea also exposes the Pershing limitations. Its underpowered engine struggles in Korean terrain. Its weight makes it difficult to deploy over Korean bridges, many of which cannot support 46 tons. The Army begins developing the M46 and M47 patent series, which incorporate Pershing designs with more powerful engines. The Pershing's arrival in 1945 raises uncomfortable questions about American tank development priorities. Why did it take so long? How many Sherman crews died in engagements where a Pershing would have survived? These questions lack satisfying answers because they implicate systemic failures in military bureaucracy, production, philosophy, and strategic forecasting. General McNair's belief that tank destroyers could counter heavy armor proves inadequate. His death in July 1944, killed by friendly fire during Operation Cobra, removes the primary institutional obstacle to heavy tank development. But the delay costs lives. Comparing the Pershing to its contemporaries reveals both American pragmatism and missed opportunities. The Soviet IS-2 heavy tank, operational since 1944, mounts a 120 Tunnan gun and carries heavier armor than the Pershing. The British Centurion, entering service in May 1945, will serve effectively for decades. The Pershing exists in a middle space, better than what came before, adequate for its moment, but not revolutionary. Its 90 millimeters gun is powerful, but not exceptional. Its armor is good, but not impenetrable. Its mobility is acceptable, but not impressive. It is a competent answer to an urgent problem engineered under time pressure to meet battlefield necessity. The deeper legacy lies in what the Pershing taught American armor doctrine. First, technological power matters. Courage and tactics cannot indefinitely compensate for equipment disadvantages. Second, crew confidence affects combat effectiveness. Tankers who believe their vehicle can protect them fight differently than tankers planning their escape routes. Third, the gap between peacetime doctrine and combat reality can be lethal. The belief that tank destroyers would handle enemy armor, while Sherman's exploited breakthroughs sounded logical in planning rooms, but failed on battlefields where Panthers, ambushed from tree lines and tigers, anchored defensive positions. Perhaps most significantly, the Pershing represents a moment of institutional learning. The army that designed the Sherman in 1940 believed the next war would resemble the last war, emphasizing mobility and breakthrough rather than armor duels. The army that deployed the Pershing in 1945 had learned through painful experience that wars do not follow pre-war predictions. Equipment must adapt to battlefield realities, not the other way around. This lesson shapes post-war tank development. The M26 pattern incorporates Pershing experiences with better engines. The M48 addresses mobility issues. The M60 series continues the evolution. Each generation learns from the previous generations combat deficiencies. But we must also acknowledge what the Pershing could not solve: the fundamental vulnerability of armored warfare. No tank is invincible. The Pershing could be destroyed by Panzer Faust's anti-tank mines, flanking shots, and mechanical failure. In Korea, rough terrain immobilized Pershings that enemy fire could then destroy at leisure. The psychological comfort of better armor sometimes created tactical overconfidence. Pershing crews occasionally engaged in direct confrontations that Sherman crews would have avoided, sometimes paying the price. Protection and firepower are not substitutes for tactical intelligence. Stand in Cologne today, near the cathedral that dominates the city center, and you can trace the path Pershing 26 took on March 6, 1945. The street corner where Mashalinek's crew encountered the Panther has been rebuilt. The scorch marks from that brief violent engagement are long gone. The cathedral itself, damaged but never destroyed by Allied bombing, stands as a monument to both destruction and survival. It is a fitting metaphor for the men who fought in tanks on both sides. They sought to destroy each other, while somehow surviving forces designed to obliterate them. The Pershing story is not about technological triumph or engineering superiority. It is about adequacy arriving in time to matter. It is about institutional systems learning slowly and expensively that pre-war assumptions do not survive contact with combat reality. It is about the men who climbed into the first 20 Pershings, deployed to Europe knowing these tanks were unproven mechanically, questionable, and urgently needed. They trusted their lives to machines fresh from assembly lines with minimal testing, because those machines offered something their Shermans never did: a chance to fight German heavy armor without accepting death as the likely outcome. The laughter that German crews supposedly directed at early Pershing sightings, if it happened at all, died quickly, not because the Pershing was invincible, but because it was sufficient. It carried a gun that could penetrate Tiger armor. It provided protection that could withstand 75 millimeters rounds and some 88 millimeters hits depending on angle and range. It gave American tankers the psychological foundation to advance rather than retreat when German heavy armor appeared. These are not small things. In warfare, the gap between hopelessly outmatched and fighting chance measures not just in millimeters of armor and calibers of guns, but in courage, morale, and the willingness to engage rather than evade. When Corporal Clarence Smoyer fired those 290 millimeters rounds into the Panther in Cologne, he was not just destroying an enemy tank. He was demonstrating that American industry and military adaptation could produce answers to battlefield problems. He was showing that courage, when properly equipped, could defeat technological superiority. He was proving that the men who died in Sherman's facing Tigers had not died because American engineering could not do better, but because American doctrine and bureaucracy had been too slow to recognize what battlefield commanders knew. Sometimes you need a bigger gun and thicker armor, and no amount of tactical flexibility compensates for inadequate equipment. The Pershing served in Korea was modified and improved into the Patton series and influenced American tank design philosophy for decades, but its real legacy is simpler and more human. It was the tank that told American crews they were no longer expected to die nobly in unequal fights. It was the moment American armor doctrine admitted that courage and numbers cannot indefinitely substitute for capability. It was the day the Wehrmacht realized that American industrial power, once properly directed, could produce not just more tanks, but better ones. The Tiger crews, who laughed if they laughed, stopped laughing when 90 millimeters rounds started penetrating their supposedly impenetrable armor. They stopped laughing when Pershings began seeking out engagements rather than avoiding them. They stopped laughing when they realized the equation had changed and American tankers were no longer climbing into coffins but into machines that could fight back. That change, more than any battle statistics or kill ratios, is what mattered. It is what the men who crewed Pershings remember. It is what that footage from Cologne represents. It is the moment when American armored forces stopped compensating for equipment disadvantages and started fighting on level ground and on level ground against an enemy running out of fuel, ammunition, and territory. Competent equipment in sufficient numbers is enough to win. The Pershing proved that the men who fought in them lived that truth, and that, finally, is why it matters.